Hi everybody. We are going to have more stories coming up, a couple more, that are about Jesus meeting his friends after he rose from the dead. The first one that we talked about was Mary Magdalene and how he saw her and how he called her name and said, "Mary." Well, this is a story of one of the other disciples who met him afterward. Jesus had appeared a couple times to people even before this, but this is a story of how Peter and he met up again. Now, you have to remember, the last time Peter had seen him before this was when Peter, well, I didn't tell you that story, did I? After Jesus was arrested, he was taken to be questioned. And Peter followed him, and some people stopped him and said, "Hey, you're with him, aren't you?" And Peter had said, "No, I don't know him." 3 times he said, "I have no idea who he is. Not me. Nope, he's not my friend." Well, this is what happened afterward. First time he has seen Jesus since that. Remember, Peter was a fisherman. A lot of them were fishermen. And so, when they decided to try to get back to the things that they had done before they had gone wandering around the countryside with Jesus, they decided they wanted to go back to fishing again, especially Peter. He said, "I want to go fishing. Let's go back to the Sea of Galilee." And it was almost dark when they arrived, and they hadn't eaten. "We're all hungry," said Peter. "Let's go fishing so we can catch some fish to eat." So they went fishing. They rowed their boat out from the shore, and they threw their net into the water. They put their net in the water, and they waited, and they waited, and they waited, and they waited. And they waited, and waited even longer. And they weren't catching anything. No fish. The net was empty. And then they lowered it back into the water and pulled it back out again. Still no fish. They stayed out there all night long and didn't catch a single fish. Not a sardine, not a guppy. Then suddenly they heard a voice calling to them. And the voice says, "Hey, have you caught any fish?" "No, we have not," answered Peter. "And we've been here all night." "Cast your net on the other side of the boat. That's where the fish are." That was a man on shore shouting to them. Well, how would he know? They're out there in the boat. They're looking down into the water. He's on shore. He can't see what's happening. And the disciples didn't see how moving the net would help. But nothing else had worked. So they did as the man had said. And in a minute or two, just a minute or two, the net was full of fish. It was so full of fish they couldn't even lift it to get it back in the boat. Here's a picture. It was so heavy they were afraid it was going to tear the net. Can you see the boat tipping over from the weight of the fish? Pretty amazing. And who was that man? Well, they'd been fishing all night long, and they had to figure that out. Who was this man that knew how to change everything like that and how to do things? One of the disciples said, "It must be Jesus." Who else would know? Who else could see everything? Who else always knew just what to do and when and how? It was Jesus. And Peter looked up. He was so happy because he could see the sun was coming up, and he thought, yeah, maybe that does look like Jesus after all. And everybody had said he was back from the dead, and here was his chance to see him. And he got so excited that he jumped out of the boat to swim to shore to see him. And he didn't even take his coat off. He kept everything on and jumped in the water. He was that anxious and that eager. And he swam to shore, and when he got there, he looked up and he was so happy because it was Jesus. Peter couldn't wait for the nets to be pulled into the boat. He wanted to be with Jesus. And the other disciples, they rowed up afterward. And when they got there, they realized Jesus had already built a fire on the shore. And Peter, he began to have memories that he didn't like. He was glad to see Jesus again, but he didn't know that Jesus would be so glad to see him. He thought about the fire that was in the courtyard where he had told everybody he wasn't Jesus' friend, and he hadn't stood up for him. He hadn't put in a good word for him. He even said he didn't even know him. If you have friends, you stand by them when they have problems. You don't just hang out with your friends when things are going well. You stick with them, and if they get sick, you help them. If they need help with their homework, you give them a hand. If they're trying to carry something that's too heavy for them, you get the other end. They would do that for you, and Jesus did everything for all of us. And Jesus, he looked at Peter this time, and Peter was probably wondering what he was about to say. While they were eating their breakfast, Jesus asked Peter, here's a picture of them roasting the fish over the fire and then talking. Jesus said, Peter, do you love me? Yes, Jesus, you know I do, said Peter. Well, then feed my sheep, said Jesus. That's a strange thing to say. And a few minutes later, Jesus asked him again, Peter, do you love me? And Peter said, yes, I do. Jesus said, feed my sheep. And they waited a few minutes longer. And then Jesus asked him a third time, just like he had said, I don't know him 3 times. Now he's asking him 3 times, do you love me? Peter kind of lost it. He said, you know I love you, all right? You know it. And Jesus said, well then, feed my sheep. He was telling him that he wanted him to take care of the other disciples around him. And he wanted Peter to know that just because he'd messed up didn't mean that Jesus didn't trust him. Because we all make mistakes. And we all learn from them. At least we should learn from them. And sometimes we come out of them much better people. It's kind of a dumb way of learning. And if you can avoid making those mistakes in the first place, even better. But if you do, it doesn't mean Jesus doesn't love you. But it may mean he'll expect you to learn from it and maybe even be a better person because you know he loves you even despite it. I'm going to tell you another story tomorrow. One lesson I've learned over the years, it's important to get a good night's sleep. So, it's bedtime. Get some sleep. And in the morning, pay attention to the people you love and the people who love you. See you then. Bye-bye.